Welcome to episode 16 of What's in the Box. I am Tolgar Alpagut, VP of Marketing at Tatsoft, and with me every week is Marc Taccolini, our founder and CTO. How are you today, Marc? I believe you may be muted, so.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
Perfect.
So episode 16, we've done 4 months of this, which is great, putting out content. And I know that episode 6, when we had Walker on, we kind of asked the community, what do you guys like in terms of content? And one of it was a deep dive into technical kind of how-to. And today is just one of those episodes where we'll be covering that. The topic is advanced.NET scripting. And I'm going to let Marc take it away here. And he's going to give you just a little bit of a disclaimer on what the prereqs are for today's episode. And then we can start. Go ahead, Marc.
Well, today we are going to go on the details on how you do the configuration of the scripts in Factory Studio. So the basic knowledge of the platform, even not a user, at least show on our previous videos where give the basic explanation about the configuration tools would be useful. And definitely some background on programming or scripting, because we will even go to code examples. So those are my recommendations.
All right. And, this will always be on YouTube, so you can always pause and investigate if you've got questions. But just to Marc's point, there will be some base level of knowledge here required. So.
Okay, so let me share my screen and go to our development environments. Okay, and to put everyone on the same page in case you decide to follow even without that much of the previous knowledge, that's the basic Factory Studio configuration environments. So one of those icons is a project configuration. So what you call a project configuration, we are going to deploy for production. It's pretty much a solution. And under that, we have the main configuration regarding scripts, that projects that are going to explore, and some other areas that we use scripts. And still to put everyone on the same page on that, the base important concepts that we have is we have those built-in code editors that are able to even code translation, and we have very support that I'm going to show to events and scheduling, and that concept of what is task class expressions and what it does mean the context of our software, I will make clear. And another concept I will start explaining right now is the concept of server and client domains. What is that in the context of our products? When you deploy a solution, it's very common architecture that we have a server computer. That computer may have some historic database or be a direct connection. You have the controllers, but on the clients, on the operators, you are going to have many computers. So that's a cheap deployment architecture. You have one server and many operators accessing that data. So far, so good with the audio, Tolgar?
Yeah, no, everything sounds great, and I'm following along here.
Just make sure. And essentially, go back to my, what does happen is some variables, for instance, a sensor, when you read on the server, you do want all the same value to show to all operators. So if I'm reading the furnace temperature, definitely it should be all the same information. But let's get some other examples. If this operator is requesting reports from July to October, all the data is input on start date of the reports and date of the reports is data that should be local to this computer. We don't want, when we are selecting the start date of the report in one computer, another operator will be forced to use that same start date. So when you have a distributed application like that you have many computers, operators, and the server, we have that concept of domain. So domain server is a variable that's global to all the computers, like the furnace data or the temperature data. And we call client the data that is restricted only to one specific computer, like the username in that computer. That's another good example. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay. And that concept is very key to understand, because there is another concept you need to understand. It's not only about the data. If I'm going to run some .NET scripting, I'll be running this computer, or I'll be running that same codes to all operators in each client computer. Depends on what kind of codes I need to deploy. So when I deploy not only variables, but you can deploy codes on the server sides, and you can deploy codes to be running on the client side computer. So if some simulation for user interface, you do on the client sides. If it's some advanced calculation, you do on the server sides. And because I have data here and data here, we must have, and we do in TaxSoft, a behind of the scenes data synchronization. So when the variable temperature changes on server, the displays, everything, they have a local cache, a local variable of the last value of those variables. So behind the scenes, for the variables that are global, you must be aware that there is some data being exchanged here. And the importance of that, when you think about performance and some other things, need to be aware that there is this data synchronization between the server and the client computer. Okay, this is the concept of domains. With that, we can go back to the scripts, so you can understand how you should organize those scripts. First of all, remind we have tasks and classes. Tasks is like a .NET function, so you can ask run to run every amount of time, or you can put that script to run based in the changing of another variable, and you can select the many languages. Today I'm going to stay on with C#. And you see that when you define that code to run, you define if it's going to run on the server computer or on the client computer, okay? So if I decide to go on the server computer, here I go to my code editor, and I can start doing my programming that this code will be running in the server computer. And because I'm running in the server, I can do things like that. I can access the server namespace to go for data. But the system will not allow you to open a display. It will not work here. It will cause a compilation error, because the screens, everything regarding the user interface, you have one instance running each computer. So if I want to do things like open automatically display, I need that code running on the display, so you can put that code to run in each and all client computers, okay? So that's why when you are in the code editor, that's some kind you can call information on the server, or if I script of type clients, you do for the clients also. Keep moving. As Tolgar said, you can always stop if you need to slow the breath, but I'll keep going. Uh, Now that you know that you can allocate that to run each client's computer, so to make that example clear, okay, if I want to do in my UI something that if a tag here that I'm reading is greater than some other value, I want to automatically uh, uh, show to the operator one specific display. To be able to do that, okay, that would be asking to open display. In this case, then the code needs to be off on the clients. Okay, go
I
ahead.
think integers. I think integer is misspelled there. Possibly there's an R in there
Oh yeah, thank you.
in line 9.
Yeah, are you correct? And that symbol is wrong also. So, okay, and there is also the misspell. Anyway, I not put this. This tag does not exist. Thank you. That's why we should use IntelliSense, by the way, instead of typing.
Absolutely.
One of the features that we have. And since I opened that parenthesis, in this code that I'm create a small example, keep in mind you also can call all .NET namespace is red mapped. So any function from the .NET, you can call that right away. So now no errors because I'm accessing the namespace display, but I define this task to be here. And a task, how it works, it's multi-threading. So even I have many tasks to run on the server at the same time, this process and this process, they run in its own threads on the system. And you must understand tasks as like a function, but instead of you having to define when that method will be called, this method will be executed every time one of those events happen. And one thing that you do automatically, if you work with exceptions that you don't need to do in your application, .NET has the ability to define try-catch statements. So you put this under a try, and then you catch the exception. You can catch exactly which error did happen. And then here you put how you are going to handle whatever error it happens in that. When you do scripts with us, you can do that because you can do anything from .NET, but you don't need to, because we automatically have a try-catch exception in all the places when the application is running. And we use our runtime tool that is the trace window to show back all those exceptions that have. Okay, so that's about tasks. Sometimes you to be too boring to do one class, just to do add two variables. So these environment expressions allow you more quickly do things like the one I just did, that I'm creating this variable to be the result of those two when they change value, and also a run calculation they start up. And the syntax we use on those expressions, we did some wizards. It can be either C# or VB.NET, okay? So the expressions, and you can more easily define timers, but on the end of the day, it's only how you are activating. Here I'm activating this code. I'm calling this library to run the codes. So the expression, the task is similar functionalities. This one, if you have lots of events that need to require a simple process, you do on expressions. and on the expression is the only place in the software you need to do a compiling. Or when you run, you do that automatically. But that's how you put those tests to run. We're going to run the domain, the frequency, and the codes, and we do the synchronization of the data. Classes, of course, we have the same concepts. When you define a library of methods to be used on screen, whatever application, you need to define if that library will be physically on the server computer or on the client's computer. Because again, keep in mind, by default, every time you deploy a Factory Studio solution, you are deploying a distributed architecture where you have many computers. The main computer doing the data processing that has the connection with the database, the PLC, is the server computer. And each one of those is a client's computer and running its own little subset of the application. So the same way you need to define about the data, the libraries also, they can be like everything else on the server computer or on the client's computer. So the next question is, if I'm doing code that's of type server, and I go here to call my library, if I am the server computer, I will be able to call the libraries from the server or from the client also. That's a big question, Tolgar.
Yeah.
And I will help you. I will not ask you.
I'm not ready for this one.
In this, you'll be able to call only classes that are on the server.
Okay.
Because the codes that you run on the server computer, doesn't matter if you have 1, 10, 100 clients. The codes that you run on the server computer only should manage with data that's global to all application and let what's specific to the client to be solved on the clients. So when you do the programming from the server sides, we only allow you to call methods or libraries creating our product that are exposed to the server computer, okay? Now that you told you the answer, makes sense, Tolgar?
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense now.
Okay, but let's talk about now a client. If I have these codes here that of type clients, so I'm running that in each and all client's computer, and I'm now to do the programming for that. For sure, I should be able to call the classes that were defined in the client namespace. But the key point is you can also call classes, in this case, on the server computer. So when it's a client computer, you can call methods in your own computer, that client libraries. But for libraries, we allow you automatically call a class that will be running on the server computer. And the only thing you need to be aware of is that it's great way to do, like, it's almost like web services behind of the scenes, just calling directly what you want from the server computer. But what you must be aware regarding performance and also potential network configuration problems, if I am in a client domain, wrote code for the display, and I call some sort of method on the server computer, this method will be physically be executed on this server computer. We are going to really call that to be to do the execution. So in some cases, depends on how is your network configuration, on what that you do, there may be some time before that proceeds to execution. Do you have the audio there, Tolgar?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. That's one thing that never will be the same when I'm doing that live. I can hear you guys.
It's always in the back of the mind.
Yes, yeah. I typically, when I am an old guy, when I started, it was with live audience, and we have the people's noise. Anyway, uh, and another thing that's important to understand, that's a very tricky issue. When we have that, I have this client calling a procedure on the server. If this application starts some access to databases or modify some variables, it's possible that the data you are doing here does not have time to propagate to the remainder of the system. So I'm not covered that in details. I'm just raising you a big alert flag. If you call something on the server, you cannot, and the server modify something in some database or even in some sort of global resource or global tag property that's residing on the server. You cannot necessarily assume that whatever changes that remote code did on the other computer will have time to propagate to this computer. And the details of that will be beyond we would have time to cover, but really be very careful when calling classes from the server if you are in the clients, for two reasons. Number one, it will take more time because this code will be executed in the other computer and you have to wait for the reply. That's one reason. And another reason to avoid that is that synchronization problem. It depends on what the application will be doing on the server computer. So just a little. But other than that, it's very useful because that's very easy to do those distributed applications. So that's what we do in test class code expressions. When you are doing code that is here on the code behind, it's pretty much the same, but the code that you put here on the screen is connected with this specific page. So the code behind has similar concepts of calling libraries, calling classes, but the triggers for the execution will be when the display open, while the display is open every X milliseconds, when the display is closing, or when you press some button on the screen. So like when you add an action and you're saying that action, I need to run a script. And I create a script here on my code behind to be the reaction to that button. But all the concepts I'm talking about scripts, client server, apply to this code, with the only difference that this code is always on the client side. Going back here to the main configuration. When we present those classes, some people that are more advanced programmers, they say, oh, but this is not exactly a class. The name, you are using the name class, but what you have inside those classes is pretty much a bunch of libraries, methods to be called. Yes, that's true. But we also allow in Factory Studio to create the equivalent of the .NET classes. So if instead of putting directly the name of the methods, if I create a namespace and I put all that inside a namespace and I create a more traditional .NET programming to specifically define what I have regarding namespaces and classes, do the full .NET programming. Now, automatically, will also accept that. That's why we have this hidden column here called contents. Content means that the contents of this class is only some methods, and we create automatically a class around that. So like just sys monitoring, it's only a bunch of methods. So when I'm going to use a sys monitoring class, we took care for you, so don't have to worry. We just go to script.classes. You see our sys monitoring class there because we are creating automatically that class based on the methods you described. But you can also, you allow to create full .NET classes. So the content on these codes here is a more, it's the complete .NET programming. So if I want to use that library from my codes, I go to, and I need to call, or I can call to create .NET objects. So in this case, those methods that I'm going to call from this class will be working exactly as in .NET programming. You can create objects, you can do anything on that. And because we have that very close connection with .NET applications, sometimes you have a data template here that matches a .NET class, because you create these templates and the .NET class the same, either doing that manually or going in run extensions, .NET classes, and importing the data structures from the .NET class directly. But anyway, it's very common that when you are doing more advanced programming with .NET, that you have a scenario that you have a tag in the application that, for instance, the server monitor info, it's a data structure with all information of your server. And you may also have, if I doing your own .NET programming, some sort of class that can represent the same information. So when you have scenarios like that, you have a tag and you have some objects. That's why we create on the toolkit those methods called copy tag to .NET objects. So it means I can pick up all the contents of my tag server monitor info and copy to this .NET object that I just created. So it will pick up all the properties, all the full tree arrays. So this comment may be moving perhaps thousands or hundreds of variables, because this is like a tree, like a data structure, and I will make copy all the public properties to that other objects, okay? And we're not talking too much about that data tables, but that same concept to really move data around is with data tables. Data table, I'm not covering detail, but if you do any kind of programming with scripts on databases, or even doing screens for KPIs, dashboards, you should get familiar with the data table, because there is a .NET structure called data table. And in Factory Studio, you also can create tags of type data table that will be pretty much like a set of data. That's why it's very useful for scripts. But anyway, going back to the concepts I was explaining on the toolkits, just a second. I was going to open a new project for that explanation. Talk about moving data with the data tables. So let me create another project to pick up from a cleaner one. When you have data templates like the self monitor info, and you are doing that more advanced programming, it's very common that we have to exchange data between your server sides and your client side applications. So on the toolkit namespace, you can not only copy .NET objects, but you can copy also tags to data tables. So we have many and many options under the toolkits to move data in between those three entities. Yeah, I think if I show you back this other screen, okay. Keep moving, and going to some really advanced explanation on how that can be great. If I doing some KPI display on the screen and I need some data from the server computer, just very easily do our dataset model to query the server if it's a SQL, or you can call a script class on the server computer to get to the data, or you can even have a tag that's type of data table to bring you that data to the local client display. And here on the client display, you can go through that data table, do all the modifications, all you want to do on the client side, because with this call, we are brought to the client computer all the data that you need. Okay. Little explanation if you got perhaps on the middle of that. Here we are assuming that we have knowledge on the TouchSoft platform and also on the scripting. Okay, just to be clear, because I'm not really going to the intermediate steps on why exactly you apply that to the beginning projects. Here I'll talk about applications that are really having to use lots of external code and does have that client-server architecture. Keep moving.
Yeah.
All those examples that I'm giving so far, we are using codes that we ourselves created. Not necessarily created, but we just have that code here on the application. So it's defined, all the libraries, everything is defined here. But again, just to be 100% clear, the code is defined here, but you can copy paste any code you find on the internet here, and you can use, because it's a full .NET compiler. You only may need to map some namespaces when you are copying paste codes, because we do some mappings behind the scenes. That's why in our case, you don't need to do using like a typical C# application, because all the most common usings we do automatically. But if you are eventually doing copy paste from internet codes, you may to add namespaces you are using, but it's the full capabilities. But how you add not only initial namespaces, but additional libraries, an external codes created by you. Well, you do have in run builds references the ability to add libraries to the system. And here you can pick up pretty much any .NET library from the system. Let's get one example here. So if I pick up this, this one, this library from this third-party components, and I am adding the reference to this library to the system. So here we added this library to the system to applications running the client computer, and that's the alias. It's like Visual Studio adding a reference. And now that I have that reference on my namespaces, I can also have these third-party components. That's the one I just added. And that's exactly like it would be in Visual Studio. So if I added that component there, now I have access to the library I just did mapping, okay? And do you know one little thing, frustration of programming, Tolgar?
No, tell me.
What I just told, that's that easy to add, and we don't need to do the exception, and we just pick up the library, define the domain, and start using. If you are a programmer, especially if you had to do client-server programming on the old times before .NET, is when you say, oh, great. But it is that kind of joke that you only can tell to someone that has very specific cultural knowledge.
Yeah, you got to be in the know to understand.
Yeah,
Sure.
otherwise you're not see the funny. But what I'm showing now was supposed to be a key thing to see that you can access your components that easily. Okay. Yeah, that's why sometimes needs, like the TV shows, nightlife, you need some sound effects.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, essentially, you can add those external components very easily in your system. You just, again, that's why I put so much time in the beginning explain about domain clients, because you need to say, okay, this library, this physical library, it's a file, will be applied on the client computer, on the server computer, or if you need to deploy the same file in both places, we have that option also available, okay? Sometimes you may want to have the ability to call a library in either way. And here, it's pretty much exactly like Factory Studio, and this here is just a macro that will resolve to whatever you have the file, but the assembly path can be anything. And we do have a nice feature on that are not covered in detail. I will just give a hint that feature is there. When deploying applications in Windows Presentation Foundation, create WPF controls, you need to make sure if you use third-party libraries, you are going to have that in your system. And in the Factory Studio installation, we have a folder called WPF controls that you can customize which files the remote computer will have automatically access. So if you need to have, like in our case, some libraries from third-party libraries or external libraries that the client will have access, the operators will have access, some like components for some WPF controls for user interfaces. You don't need to install anything on the client computer. You just drop that third-party component here that will care to bring that data to the other station.
Okay.
Good. So, very important, Tolgar. If we don't have a question on that, we will have, as more people see this video. Some people say, okay, we have a problem here. because if I go to run builds on my computer, I have only a message. I don't have this reference tab here. What's happening? As many people know, we have the demo license that allows you to test the application. And also, even if we have the full license, we allow to create new projects of type Express that's not for production. It's only a limited project that will not require license, but for training or demo nodes. And so when you are creating a project of type Express, or also if you don't have a license to the computer, any of those conditions, we don't expose that functionality on the demo. Okay? So if you don't see that ability, just make sure that you have a license on that computer. And second, go to info project settings and make sure the family is enterprise. Good. So could spend more time on that, but adding the external component to call, it's really only that. Okay. And by the way, when I talk components, I'm talking here on importing codes. Okay. I will not cover today because it's more related to the user interface, but we have also the ability to import on extensions. We have that concept of exports and imports components and plugins. So to be clear, the distinction, because the name external components may be used in both contexts. Let me be very, very clear the difference between those two things. Here is when we need to add .NET assemblies, .NET script codes created by someone else. Okay.
Okay.
And it's very useful also, as I did explain, to add WPF controls to use on the user interface. This tool, and we use sometimes named components also on extensions, this export and import is regarding exporting data from the application to another TouchSoft application. So these exports here and the components you create are essentially to migrate data in between Factory Studio applications. Okay. Nothing related with third parts here in when we use components in this context. Okay, Tolgar?
Yeah.
No. I just realized that the name components is being used in those two contexts, but quite different. So when you import data, here import meaning we are creating Factory Studio TouchSoft tags or codes based on the configuration files are reading internally. That's the imports. When I'm going to export, I can export not only tags, but I can export scripts. We can export any type of object. We can export displays. We can export symbols or codes. But then we are going to import that in another Factory Studio application. I'll not go on the detail of this. That's for another video. So going back to the run builds, that's why in some cases you will not be able to see that. Okay. And one thing that we have, Tolgar, if we do have some information published in our documentation on client, specifically on client-server programming, okay? And if you don't find that easily in our documentation in our support website, send us an email. You'll be helping us to improve our index keywords. because that same problem did explain of the synchronization, because you have those two computers. You need also to be very aware when query external resources, like databases, or send a message to another application to receive a reply. The distributed infrastructure that we have allow you to very easily see a data that's shared in between two computers, but there is some time that data to synchronize. We also make very easily from one computer to call methods from the other computer, but does not mean that whatever that other computer is doing will create some queries database or some actions that will take some time to be reported back. So the good news on distributed applications, we make so simple that you don't need to be advanced knowledge of networking to do any kind of distributed client-server programming for distributed applications. The bad news, it hides so much that that sometimes you forget there is that in place. And for some more advanced cases, querying third-party system, you need to be aware that we have those behind-the-scenes delays or synchronizations happening between the computers. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's good for today, for the time we have. Okay. And when you publish and on the notes, on the remarks, make sure that here I put the focus. Yes, we have basic knowledge of scripting, and let's review where we put the Factory Studio scripts on the in many places, and more specifically, how to deal with that concept of client server on distributed applications. That's the description, Tolgar, for you.
Yeah, no problem. I will be visiting this video and make sure that we've got that disclaimer up as well as that information. And we didn't have any questions today, but if you do have any questions after watching this and pausing and going back and playing it again and pausing and playing back, check out forum.tatsoft.com and you can leave your questions there, and our dev team will be able to respond. Supports very quickly. So, Marc, next week is episode 17. We'll announce the topic. I'm sure, we've got a myriad of things here to talk about. And then I want to thank you today for today's episode, just because I learned a lot. Some of it, I'll be honest, was a little over my head. I think some of the prereqs I definitely have to brush up on, but I found it very informational. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Have a good day.